All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Great.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Anna Brown from Katie Budget Books. I'm the events coordinator here, and I am so excited about these New Year, New You panels we've been having. And I'm really excited tonight to be doing our Better Friendships themed event with Erin Falconer. So, Erin Falconer is the author of How to Get Shit Done, a digital entrepreneur, and the editor in chief and co owner of PickTheBrain, one of the most trusted self improvement communities online. She was named one of the top digital entrepreneurs in Los Angeles by LA Confidential and one of the top 7 women changing the digital landscape for good by Refinery 29. Erin has a master's degree in clinical psychology and lives in Los Angeles. And she is here tonight because of her book, How to Break Up with Your Friends, which don't let the title scare you. All right, guys, if you don't have any friends you need to break up with, it's really just like a relationship guide for your friendships. And I loved it so much. I am so excited to be speaking with you this evening. I am really blessed to have a great core group of friends. So absolutely nobody I want to break up with right now, but I still felt like I got a whole lot out of reading this book.
Yeah, that's
And
so.
I, sorry.
Sorry, no. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I love that you start with talking about like learning to be friendlier to yourself.
Right, and I think that's the thing that as you know, because you've read the book. There are 10 chapters in the book, and there is only one chapter on how to break up with your friends. And in fact, this book is really meant to be a kind of love letter to modern friendships, and and so I do think the first place that we always need to start to figure out where we're going, either with our careers or our relationships or life in general, is to start with yourself and really understand who you are, where you are, how you got here, and where you want to go. And it's only then, when you understand kind of the landscape of your personal being, that then you can start to make informed and intentional choices, in this case, around the people and the relationships in your life. And so yeah, it's funny because as well, I kind of had many epiphanies while writing this book, and like my first book, it's as much about concrete advice and research and my findings as it is experiential, almost real time. As you know, I'm working through things with friends as I'm writing the book. And so I had many, many epiphanies writing this book. And when one of the big ones right at the beginning was, we are a culture, this Western culture is a culture that is obsessed with knowing every piece of information they can. Like, we know every calorie, every gram of fat, all the protein, the keto, whatever diet. We're wearing watches that are tracking every single step we take, even for like late night pee runs. Like, we got to get our steps. The Marie Kondo of it all. Now we're looking at our space and saying, does this chair bring me joy? What about, these curtains? And that's all amazing stuff. But when it comes to the people in our lives, the people, right? Like, literally the most important thing. There's really no auditing process. There's no time to kind of reflect and see, who am I, engaging with on a daily basis, either in person or energetically. Who is on my mind? How are my wheels spinning? Where am I spending my energy and my time, and with whom? And so it was really jarring for me to have that kind of awareness. And that was kind of the beginning of the book, where I was like, wow, I've never once sat back and said, like, let me take stock here of and really write it down in a kind of calculated way, which seems kind of cold, but that's, you just got to get to the bottom of it. And the first way to do that is to like take stock, take inventory of the people in your lives. And it's funny because just even by writing them down, seeing a person's name on paper or on your computer screen, the reaction you have to that is so telling, right? It's either like a, or a, oh my God, I love her, or, da, da, da. And just watching your behavior as you see names as you're writing them down is it's a great place to start.
And then can you just kind of briefly, obviously the book covers this in great detail, but you talk a little bit about the different kinds of friends, which I think is kind of an important starting place for like when we're looking at our own friendships. Like, where we need to fill in gaps.
Totally. So once you kind of understand your needs and where you are, right, then you've got to kind of go out and say, okay, now I've got all these people. And the thing is, when we talk about friends, generally we just kind of lump everybody in one group. Like this is my friends. And even if they're in different groups, but they're like friends. And you might have categorization for like your absolute, BFF, your best friend. But beyond that, there's really it's just kind of a lump. And that, I talk about in the book that is a real missed opportunity, because not all friends are going to carry the same weight, and therefore the expectations on those friendships should match that. But of course you can't do that when you've got no eyes on the situation. And so I talk a lot about, there are the friends in your lives that kind of broad categories of what, and these are malleable depending on what your needs are, but the general broad strokes of the friend that is kind of your nurturing friend. You have your creative friend. You have your friend that's just a lot of fun, or your friend groups, friend or friends that are a lot of fun. You have the person that you talk to when you're kind of in crisis, or you need to make a really big decision in your life, or you're going through something. And and then you have your nostalgic friends that you've been friends with forever, that have witnessed you in more phases than probably your current romantic partner has. So have seen you and understand you from a much different place than, say, the mom friend you just met after having your first child. Now that's a different type of friendship that goes deep fast. If you have your first child, you don't know what the hell you're doing. So it's good to have those mom friends, or those kind of situational types of friends. But kind of understanding the role that each friend plays for you, and then understanding your role for them within the relationship. It's obviously very relational, and so the give and take is crucial to the health of those relationships, to understanding what their role is for you in the relationship and what your role is for them. And once you start to do this and dissect kind of the network of people in your lives, so much good information comes out of that. So much clarity starts to happen just by doing the work of kind of sorting through everything. Because the awareness piece is just so big. We're going through a lot of these relationships blindly, and friendships are, as a therapist, I this is one of the other big epiphanies I had. So for therapy, there's individual therapy, there's family therapy, there's couples therapy, nothing for friendship. And what that means to me, as I started to look at that, is that there's no language for navigating conflict. There's no blueprint for what these relationships should be, how much work they should be. If you talk about a romantic relationship and somebody says, what's the secret to the success of your relationship? Oh, it takes a lot of work. And that's like in the zeitgeist. Romantic relationships take work. Family relationships take work. Friendships are the only relationships that are just kind of there, and we think that they should give, that they're like the fun thing. But of course, any relationship worth having at all requires work. It requires a bit of conflict. As you grow, and hopefully as individuals, we're always kind of growing and evolving and trying to be, peel back layers of who we are. Then, of course, naturally, you're going to have discord or friction or new challenges if you're really alive with the other person in that relationship. And so being able to confront those challenges, as opposed to like run from them or push them down in you, is really, really important, because on the other side of that work, if we treat friendships with the same kind of respect and gravitas as the other relationships in our lives, on the other side of that work, I think, is a gold mine of support, positive energy, just really feeling seen by an important group of people that I don't think we're kind of channeling in at all to the degree that we could be. And I don't know about you in Texas, but I'm pretty sure it's the exact same as over here, where like after 2 years in this pandemic, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're frustrated, we're burnt out. And so cultivating systems of support around us in a really meaningful and intentional way, I think, is now more important than ever.
Yes, and I definitely had that experience early on. We were not fully shut down in Texas for very long. Maybe should have been a little longer. But just during that brief period where like no one was going anywhere
Right.
and I was home with my kids and my husband
Mhm.
all the time. And I love my kids and my husband, right? But it
Right.
was all of a sudden being totally isolated when I'm a retail employee. I have different people around me all the
Right.
time. And that I discovered once I got the kids to bed, I was feeling very antsy, and having a built-in system of girlfriends that I could call
Right.
even when it was pretty late was
Right.
like life-saving. It was
Totally.
incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people, I mean, I don't have that, or don't know they have it. You know, they might even have it, but they're not even aware, because they're not, I mean, how, as you just said, it was a lifesaver to be able to have that outlet and that feeling of support, and so that you could kind of, whatever you were doing, either venting or telling great stories to lift spirits, whatever it was, whatever you needed at the time. That's the beauty of friendship, and you can kind of step out of, like, I was also stuck at home, not stuck, but at home with my husband and my young son. And, you know, now, do you, have you ever heard of the couples therapist, Esther Perel?
Hmm.
Okay. So Esther Perel, for anybody that doesn't know that's listening, is a really kind of world famous, kind of iconic couples therapist. She's from Israel. She lives in the United States. Um, and so she does a lot of couple work, and she has couple really big podcasts where she actually sees couples, live, kind of on her podcast. And what I've been hearing her talk about a lot lately, in the last 6 months to a year, is that in today's modern couples, the romantic partner has become the everything to the other, and vice versa, right? So like before, like in the 50s and 60s, and I'm certainly not saying that was a perfect time, but like, somebody would, usually the husband would go off to work, the wife would take care of the house and do what she was doing, and then they would come together in the evening and discuss plans, how their day was, like, generally, but that was about it, right? Today's couples are like, and coming out of a pandemic where you've been literally working from home together, but every single coworker of the other person, you not only are talking about exercising, what you did for exercise, you're actually exercising with them, you're completely co-parenting, every single thing about the other person. And that's a lot of pressure, right, on romantic relationships, because of course no one person can ever be somebody else's everything, only you can be your everything, right? So what having a dynamic group of friends that you can call, hang out with, download with, really takes a lot of pressure off of the romantic relationship, so that you can kind of compartmentalize and say, okay, I don't need this romantic person in my life to know every single thing. There can be some mystery, there can be some magic, there can be some unknown, you know what I mean? And vice versa. So having healthy friendships, I think, also is really important to sustenance in your own romantic relationships.
Yeah, and I love that one of the things you talk about a lot in the book is like having a conversation with your friends and
Mhm.
like a lot of different ways.
Right.
But kind of going back to one of your previous responses, that the idea of like defining who
Mhm.
you are to each other, which relates kind of back to the romance. We don't get into a romantic relationship, most of us. I know some people are way more laid back about this than I am, but I don't get into a romantic relationship and just be like, we'll just see. I don't know what he thinks is happening. Like, we're
Right.
fine here. But with our friends, it is very much, for the most part, just kind of like, well, we're friends. And I have no idea what their expectation is.
Exactly. Understanding the expectations is so important. I was being interviewed a couple of weeks ago by Maria Menounos, who is I don't know if you know who she
Yeah.
is. She's like so she has a really cool podcast called Better Together. And she said to me on the show, she said, Erin, okay. So she whipped her phone and she's like, so I've got this friend, um, and we've known each other for a long time, and we're, I think of her really fondly, and I think she does me, and we always make plans, and we're very excited about it, and we do all the details, like we're meeting here at this time on this day, da 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 da. Yay, yay, text back and forth, and without fail, either the night before or the morning of, she cancels. And she goes, literally, she has done this the last 10 times in a row. She pulled up her phone and she goes, look, And so I look at it as a thing, and just as she's saying, it's just every single time. And she goes, so what do I do with this friend? And I said, well, Maria, I hate to break it to you. You're not in a friendship with this person. You're in some kind of weird relationship, but this is not a friendship. You have no idea of each other's expectations. And I said, what if this were a guy you were dating? Right? And every single time for the last 10 times that you made plans, he bailed on you the night before the morning. You'd be done with him in 5 seconds, because there's a clear expectation that that behavior is unacceptable for most people, in a healthy, as a sign of what could be a healthy relationship, right? We know these things because, again, it's in the zeitgeist, because we talk about expectations. But when it comes to friendship, how long, I said to Maria, are you going to let this woman keep canceling plans? I go, you're co-creating the problem because you keep reuniting with her to try and make another plan. But there's a real misunderstanding the expectations here, because one thinks it's fine to do this and the other is getting hurt by it, you know? And so that idea of like being on the same page with somebody is really important, and communicating it, you know?
Which seems like such a basic, like I talk to my
Right.
friends all the time, but am I talking to my friends about like what our friendship is? Not so much.
Right.
Like,
Right. And well, and that's the thing that's like, it felt almost sometimes when I was writing this, like, do I really need to say this? Because, and then do we really need to say this? And I was like, yeah, we do. We're just so used to not saying it. But look, at some point when we started out in romantic relationships and even navigating family relationships, we know what their expectations are, because we've kind of gone through it, and through trial and error, or through, you learn that you have to talk about these things. But with friendship, we're at ground zero. There are no kind of rules. And so getting down to really like that, okay, let me communicate. Let me start communicating like what the expectation is. Again, not as a reaction, like I'm really upset and here's my expectation, but proactively. I just met, you said to me at the beginning of this call that Texas, there's a lot of driving, and so you're used to driving. Well, in LA too, probably a different kind of scenery, but you're constantly trapped in cars, like, and so I live on the west side of Los Angeles by the beach, and I was at a dinner the other night and I met this amazing woman. Just cool. Like we just like, gelled. Like I was like, oh, she was talking about restaurants that I was like, oh, I love that. You just get it, like a vibe wise. And I was like, wow, I really like this woman. I'd like to be friends with her. And I said to her, well, where do you live? And she said, well, I live in Los Feliz, which is the east side. And I was like, I live on the west side. And she was like, it's okay. We can, let's send a text. And I said, before I would have been like, yeah, let's try and do that. Let's try and and we'd string each other along, and because there's no way, honestly, that I'm driving to Los Feliz unless I'm getting paid to, or really good friends getting married or something like that. So I said to her, I said, look, I'd love to be friends with you, but here's where I'm at. I just can't drive to Los Feliz. But if you were ever in Venice, I would love it if you texted me and we go for dinner. And just setting up that expectation. And she said, that's funny because I'm never going to Venice. But if you ever happen to be in Los Feliz, send me a text and we'll go. And you know what? I did text her last week when I was in Los Feliz. I said, hey, I'm here. You want to grab something to eat? And she was busy. But you know what? I'd much rather set up that kind of like, and then we'll see how it goes. But I think the starting point of that, honestly, like, I really like you. But here's the boundary with which I'll need to enter this friendship. And that's a kind of very clear-cut situation. Not all things are quite that clear, but is really healthy. And I think the more we do it, then the less we actually do have to like be like, now I'm having a conversation about this. You just kind of speak, and it's just part of the dialogue of healthy friendships, hopefully, and not in the not too distant future.
right. And I love that you said co-creating a
Yeah.
problem. And I love that because I have a very good friend now, but who had untreated adult ADD, which made time kind of meaningless to her.
Right.
So she was late all the time. And I almost stopped being friends with her because I am a mom with small children. And so I get
Yeah.
very little time for like kid-free socializing.
Yeah.
But instead, we did kind of have that frank conversation. And I realized I had been just not saying anything about
Right.
her running late for so long that she thought it wasn't a problem for me.
Right. That's totally true. It's the assumption that we're all so busy and we've all got so much chaos in our minds that we make these assumptions and create entire, narratives that are not true, when we could just say, hey, this is, I really love spending time with you, but this is where I'm now caught in this weird position. I've got kids, I've got limited time, and you keep showing up late. How can we make this work? Like, how can we, because I'm starting to feel like irritated, and I don't want to feel like that. And then all of a sudden this other story comes, her truth comes out, and it's like, oh, right, that wasn't part of the narrative I had. Okay, let's see if we can make this work.
Yes. And attendees, if at any point you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you're watching on our Facebook Live, you can comment there, just so you guys know at any time. Go ahead and ask any questions. So let's talk for a minute about how to break up with a friend, just so that we make sure we get that in there.
Yeah,
if you realize that like this friendship just really isn't working, because I have totally been guilty of the ghosting.
Right.
It's like kind of a slow ghost. I'll just respond less often for a while and then disappear. But I don't feel good about that when I do it, right? So
yeah, and I think one of the things with that is like, look, that, and when I start off this chapter is, you really, at every single time you are trying to navigate staying in or getting out of a relationship, that is at the end of the day, it is a totally personal situation, because it's not just one person, there's two people, and the dynamic between you is who else could possibly understand that, right? So I put that caveat out there, but the broad strokes are that you really need to, first of all, understand, why you want to break up with this person, what your role in co-creating this was, right? Because even if you're going to end the friendship, and this is where you don't get, when you ghost somebody, you don't get the lesson, you don't get the teachable moment out of how you could have done things differently, or what you can take into another friendship, so that, I think, as you've read the book, I talk about a friend who is one of those friends. I think we might all have one at one point in our life or another, that was like really, really amazing, really energetic, really wanted to always do fun things. And also her life was always falling apart. There was always some like calling me like, I just got kicked out of my apartment, or my dog has to have a $5,000 surgery and I can't pay rent, or just there's always some big like, and so I was her person to call. And I talk about this, I won't go into it too much, but long story short, that relationship ended when she just crossed a line that just couldn't, I was like, this is way too much. And it ended in the kind of ugly way, but an ugly and unspoken way, in that it was just this hard line ghost, like, you are finished kind of thing. And at the time, this is like 10 years ago, I really justified that as like, oh, she's a toxic, she was just toxic and da 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 da. And as I was working on this book, I remembered this story. And first of all, the first thing is, I don't think there are, except for the outliers of people that are acting in a truly deviant way, toxic people is a very easy way to give away your power and throw the responsibility onto somebody else, right? And when you give the responsibility to somebody else, you give away all of your power. I like to talk about toxic relationships, not toxic people, right? Because it's what's happening between you that is toxic. Now, a lot of times it's true that person that you're in a toxic relationship with is in perfectly reasonable relationships with other people, right? And sometimes that's not the case. And he or she is, like a bull in a china shop with everybody they're interacting with. But it's really important. So when I looked back on that example, and I started to ask myself, in turn, take some of the responsibility myself and say, what in me needed to be in that relationship? Because I was in it for a long time. This was not like a flash in the pan thing. I was in it for years. And I started to think, wow, I loved the kind of God complex that I had. Like, I'm going to come in, I'm the hero, I'm going to save the day, I'm going to get the damsel in distress out of, out of trouble again. Oh, wow, I'm an incredible person. And so if I'd been looking at that at the time like that, I would have seen like I obviously had some sort of kind of fragile ego in a way and needed validation and needed this in my life in a very unhealthy way. Right. And so it wasn't until like 10 years later, I'm writing this book and having this epiphany, like, wow, I wish I'd been able to kind of take ownership of it then, because I would have been able to take that kind of knowledge and the new energy around, the kind of self-discovery piece into all of the other relationships I cultivated over the past decade. So when you ghost somebody, you really miss that opportunity to flip the lens on yourself and say, okay, what in me needed that, number one. Number two, when you ghost somebody, and look, sometimes that's the only way out. Okay. So it's not like never, ever, ever. It's not like the cardinal sin, but it should be used super sparingly. Because another thing is like, if you have ever had a good part of a relationship with that person, what happens when you ghost them is that kind of becomes the identifying like act in that friendship, right? And so it kind of, then you can't really even celebrate the good stuff or the good times you had with that person. So it kind of becomes a wash. And that, you don't want to do that, right? You want to be able to get out of something and still be able to hold like the value that relationship provided at some point, and hold it in high regard, right? So anyways, if you have done the work, if you have looked at, all of this information and you're like, I need to put this this relationship can no longer be a part of where I'm going, where I am and where I want to go, then the first thing you need to know is, what is the best way to communicate your message, in the sense that knowing the other person, how will it be best received? So I'm somebody that always believes that if you can do it in person or on the phone with a voice, it's the best, just because it takes courage to do that. And there's some respect in that. And so you always want to kind of operate from a courageous, respectful place as much as you can. However, if the person is really emotional or reactive and you think that it just will fall on deaf ears and then you'll be kind of managing their overreaction, then that's not the best way to get the message across to them. Maybe it is a really thoughtful and well-constructed email so that they have time to then sit with it, come back to it once they calm down, and kind of metabolize it instead of having to real-time metabolize it. But be careful that you're not saying, oh, I don't think this person can handle it, to just not get yourself off the hook because you can't handle it. Because that's, those are two very different things. And so in the book, then, once you've decided what the method is that you want to, communicate what's, the new status of this friendship, this relationship, I've got many different conversation starters based on the scenario. So as you know, so if it's like, a different political ideology, or you feel the friend is not supportive, or they've treated you badly, repeatedly, like as a habit, this is, different ways to just start those conversations. And I think that's really the hardest thing, is just finding the 3 or 4 sentences to get you into the conversation. Once you're in it and the other person knows what's happening, either whether it's in the email or in conversation or in person or on the phone, all of a sudden it starts to flow, right? But it's just the starter that's really like, how do I find the words to do this? So yeah, so there's, I think, maybe 5 to 7 different scenarios in there, and then of course you can mold them, to your particular situation.
And let's talk a little bit about maybe making some new friends.
Yeah.
Because as an adult, like, that's been hard. I've kind of fallen in, I love my friends, but I've kind of fallen into friendships because we all became moms at the same time, or we're in the same hobbies,
Right.
and it's all been kind of luck, which is awesome.
Right. Which is great.
But what I've noticed, and you address this a little bit in the book, is that a lot of my friends are just very much like me.
Right.
And while
Right.
I love having that, it also feels like maybe I need some friendships that are not exactly like me.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that I think are the most amazing about friendships is that friendships actually act not just as a mirror to yourself, but through the relational aspect of these friendships, you can reveal whole other parts of yourself, right? That would otherwise lay dormant. And I think, so to your point, while it is great to have a really core group of friends who, especially if they're like long-standing friends who have seen you, as we talked about before, in many different phases of your life, can really understand who you are kind of fundamentally. That's super amazing and very important. But you also want to actively, I think, be seeking out relationships that bring out different things in you. And often that is through people that have a different experience, a different set of, a road to where they got to where where they are now, that is unlike you. And it is not only just a little more, having dynamic relationships is a little more interesting, it can reveal so much more about you to yourself and different parts of you. And I also just think in today's age where we are so fragmented and there is so many misunderstandings about, people that are different, and if you're different from them, and there's a lot of kind of friction. So now I think more than ever, like the exploration of, all right, here's my core group, but can I expand this a little bit, and in turn thereby expand myself a little bit? I think that's really important.
Yeah, and then kind of from that, like you also talk about the kind of optimal number of friends, like
Right.
the concern about stretching yourself too thin. Because as
Yeah,
a
yeah.
full-time working mom, right,
Mhm.
like I have a lot of demands on my time. And while I would love to have 1,000,005 friends, I don't really have enough time to invest in 1,000,005 friendships that
Yeah,
mean anything.
right. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of science that's coming out on friendships, and they say it takes on average, I forget which scientist says this, but 200 hours, on kind of 200 concentrated hours. In other words, not just like, you know, but like really spending 200 meaningful hours with somebody before you can understand them at any kind of level to be considered a very good and close friend. And so you factor that number, and that's a lot of hours. It's not a lot of hours over 40 years, but it certainly is a lot of hours over a couple of years, right? And so, you know, it depends also, and this goes back to really understanding yourself. Are you more introverted? Are you more extroverted? Because those needs are going to be a lot different. But generally speaking, you're never going to want to have more than 5 or 6 really good friends, in terms of just from a bandwidth perspective. The amount of time that you need to spend with these people to have meaningful engagements, where you don't spend most of your time just catching up on, the last 6 months, the kind of life admin stuff. And then, so, and that's what happens when you don't have enough bandwidth and you're seeing people. Then you spend, if you're having an hour and a half dinner, the first 45 minutes is just literally like facts and figures of where, what you've done. And there's no real, it's not that you have to get deep and talk about deep emotions, but just a connecting with the other person, having a good laugh, having, whatever it is, but really being present and being seen and seeing the other person. And you don't do that when you're just kind of catching up for 45 minutes, right? So consistency and making commitments to 5 or 6 friendships is really all that you can do in that core group. And then it's okay to recognize you have these more kind of like functional friendships, like the mom play date friendships, where you're not necessarily like calling that woman, or if you feel like you might get separated from your husband, but you really enjoy her company and you're cracking up when you're on the field, right? And so understanding, like, this does not need to be my core, but man, it really does something for me at this level. And then you have maybe your work friends, and sometimes work friends carry over into lifelong friends, but sometimes they provide great sustenance just in the doing of your day and make your day more enjoyable. And so, but if you're talking about just core people where you want to demand to be seen and hope that they demand to be seen by you and really feel like connected and supported, if you're having more than 5 or 6 of those, it's just a math problem, right? It starts to not work, right? So yeah, so you want to really look at that and say, like, I'm somebody that's got, 20 best friends. What in me needs to have 20 best friends? Why? What am I getting from these? Why do I need to have these very surface encounters and exchanges? What does that tell me about me? What do I need to do on myself to want to go deeper with a fewer people, right? And again, you need to factor in, as I already said, but it bears repeating, if you're an introvert or an extrovert, because those needs are very different.
I love that so much of the book and about what you're talking about is really about like looking at us as individuals, right? Because it feels like really that's what all relationships are
Right.
doing, is in some way like letting us see ourselves. Not that we don't care about the other people, right? Because they're important too, but like is learning about me and learning how I want to be a better person, right? And I just love that so much of the book too is about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super important. As I said, like kind of at the beginning, it's the starting point for everything, is this understanding of the self and advocating for the self in what you need and what you want, and committing, to yourself so you can commit to others in the way that they need to be committed to.
Yes. And that, so how do I want to phrase this? So I feel like maybe I have more of a communication issue than some people. I have trouble with conflict, right? And so it's like I have friends that I love very much, and they're probably minor issues. And I do the thing where then I just don't talk about the minor issues. And
Right.
I am hopeful that that is a problem for other people, that it is not just me.
Definitely a problem for other people. And
But like, can we talk a minute about like at what point you need to bring up an issue with a friend versus just like kind of reflecting on that issue in
right.
yourself?
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to find the right balance, right? You can't say every thought you ever have in your mind to the other person, because that's not fair too. You have to be your own kind of filter and your own editor, and know this is a pattern with this person, and they are consistently doing the same thing over and over again. Like, for example, your friend who is late, or had it work, and that is just something I cannot accept. Or if there is a quirk about this friend, which is not necessarily personal to you, and it is something that if you just remind yourself that this is not about you, then maybe you can digest it and get on with it, as opposed to then like somehow, because you don't want to exhaust the relationship either, right? That's what I mean about a fine balance. I was being interviewed on another podcast, and the interviewer was like, but I just can't bring it up every time I'm irritated with a friend, or that's all we'll be talking about. And I was like, well, it is true. I mean, you could say that about a romantic partner too, in a way. Like, it's just the list of the things that are irritating goes on and on and on, right? So you have to make choices. But I would say the things that are like habitual and are in any way making you feel bad about yourself, or you feel compromised as a person, these are things you need to talk about, right? These are things you need to that you need to voice. If it's, you're having a bad day and one of your friends does something that's, you kind of find irritating, but if you reflect on it, if you weren't having this bad day already, it would probably not be that big of a deal. You don't need to, you don't need to pick an itch there when it doesn't, it's accumulation of things, and really isn't big enough to bring up, right? Because you're having a bad day anyways. But I would say somebody that is like perpetually late, it can be a real sign of disrespect, right? And not being seen. Like, I have 3 children and I'm running this bookstore, and my time is very precious. Not that it's more valuable than anybody else's, but I've decided to give this hour to you, and you're constantly showing up late. It's more than disrespect in a sense. It's just you're not being seen. She doesn't understand you at all, right? And that's the problem. You can't be in a relationship with somebody that doesn't understand you at all. And so like that, and of course, once you talked about it, you worked out that was not the case, and you, which is why it's very good to talk about. In that case, if you didn't talk about it, what would have happened? You know what I mean? It would have probably gone unspoken and created a bigger and a bigger and a bigger silent chasm. Because most friendships, they aren't the big dramatic, she slept with my husband, not that. it's not the one big, sword. It's death by a million cuts, death by 1,000 cuts. And that so you don't say anything. And over time, you just develop a level of indifference because you're numbing yourself to the irritations that you don't want to address. And so you kind of have to look at it like that. Like, is this, again, if there's any kind of habitual behavior, I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And if it's anything that really makes you feel like less of a person or really not seen, then these are things you're going to want to bring up.
All right. Well, I feel like we talked a lot about kind of the negative stuff there.
Right.
So I kind of want to close with, maybe you talk a lot in the book about all the research and on
Yeah.
what the benefits of friendship are. So can we
Right.
just talk for a minute about like
Sure.
what friendships are doing for us before we end this talk, just
Yeah,
to end it on a bright note?
totally. Well, as I love with this is really a love letter to modern friendships. And I think that the power in them is so overlooked. And so beyond just like energetically and, being seen and supported, there are crazy studies out there about the power of friendship in terms of physical well-being and mental well-being. There was a study out of Sweden that said, I think you were, I don't want to misquote the stat, but something like 10 times more likely to suffer from heart disease if you didn't have a tight, close-knit group of friends than if you didn't. You don't have close, tight friendships. Your chances of getting the common cold, I think, are up by 100%, something like that. If you look at blue zones, which are, for those who don't know, are I think 5 or 6 cities around the world where the average age of living and mental functioning is about 20% to 30% higher than the global average. In all of those blue zones, psychologists and sociologists that have studied them, on the top of the list, top 3 of everybody's list is having close friendships. They attribute that to why they're living not just so long, but so well with such high cognitive function, functioning at a level like 20 to 30 years. The people 20 to 30 years younger than them are functioning at. So the benefits of this connection, of fostering these connections, go far beyond just like nice to have. And that's the thing. And yet we treat friendships as just nice to have. And the benefits are far, far greater than that. And then that's just talking about like the physical well-being. If you look at the stress, all of the diseases that are related to stress, and mental health, the mental health around stress, anxiety, depression related to stress, so much of that can be alleviated with having a close knit group of friends around you that you're really invested in, and they're really invested in you. So much so that they are saying, Vivek Murthy, who I believe is the Surgeon General right now. He was for Barack Obama, and he might be again under Biden. But he was just quoted as saying that when you go in to get like your doctor's appointment, you know how they always ask you, like in surveys, like how much do you smoke per week? How many drinks do you have per week? They're going to now be adding how many times have you socialized this week in a meaningful way. That is how fundamental these relationships are to physical and mental well-being.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for joining us this evening. It's super informative, not as informative as the book, you guys, which I love for a whole lot of reasons, not least of which is that it feels like just kind of having a conversation with a friend also. It's such a great read. It's fun to read, but it's really informative. Okay, it's doing the thing. It's How to Break Up with Your Friends. We have it in store now. You can order it online from the link from the event. So thank you again, Erin, so much for talking to us about improving our friendships this evening.
Of course. And if anybody has questions, think of questions after, you can DM me at Erin Falconer.
All right, everybody have a great evening.
Thanks, guys.